Welcome to 10th Tuesday. This is episode number 41. My name is Michael Boldin, joined by my good friend
Mike Maharrey.
Mike, today is day 586. Boy, the numbers are going up. That the GOP has, as you know, failed to get rid of Obamacare, gun control, end mass surveillance. How about we end asset forfeiture, slow down the monetary system?
Yeah, more spending.
More spending.
More war.
Yeah, so things have not gone real well in Washington, D.C., and that's why we believe it is so important, as we have preached all along. 10th Amendment Center was founded back in 2006. I thought I was just going to be a blog. Instead, here we are today doing a bunch of stuff. And,
this is my 8th year.
Congratulations,
We're
man.
now in my 8th year with the 10th Amendment Center. I can't believe you put up with me that long.
Actually, you probably do more work than I do, so we're going to just go with that. You're on 13 years, and I'm on 8. So
I doubt that.
So the message that we've put out for so many years is that if you rely on Washington, D.C. to limit the power of Washington, D.C., you shouldn't be surprised when the power of Washington, D.C. continues to grow and grow and grow, no matter who's in charge. And we've done this through various administrations from both major political parties, and Congress is run by both sides as well. It doesn't matter. Government keeps getting bigger. We talked, I think it was the last episode a couple of weeks ago, about the size of the debt and deficit. Maybe it was 1 or 2 episodes ago. Mm-hmm. And that in itself, I think, is incredibly dangerous. On my show, my Monday, Wednesday, Friday Good Morning Liberty show yesterday, I covered this article, Mike, from Foundation for Economic Education. They said 7 things. This was a guy, Brian Balfour. He wrote an article that I thought was fantastic over the weekend. He basically said there are 7 ways I would do things, or 7 things I would do to keep poor people poor. And he listed all these things that government's doing: inflating the currency, welfare programs, business regulations, et cetera, et cetera. But he missed, I think, the most important one, and that is what your report was on over the weekend, this unprecedented, this massive astronomical cost of America's unconstitutional wars, $5.6 trillion plus since 2001, and they're not even counting everything. So as Madison put it, war is the parents of armies and debts and taxes. Armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for putting the many under the dominion of the few. So when you're talking about how to destroy liberty, it's basically, if you go crazy with the economy, you go crazy with foreign policy, things are really bad. And we aren't seeing those things turn around in Washington, D.C., are we?
No, not at all. And, I'll add something to that report. The report that you mentioned focuses on those monetary costs. And one of the things I thought was interesting is the fact that the Pentagon, not surprisingly, way underestimates the financial cost of war. But as I was working on that report, it really struck me, there's a human cost and a societal cost that you can't even quantify in terms of money. Just the debasement of morality, I think, is the way Madison actually put it, that comes along with war. You end up having less of a sense of value for human life. And then just the cost of what it's doing to the men and women who are having to go over and fight those wars. I was talking to a friend of mine over the weekend who is a Marine Corps veteran about some of his experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq, and how much of an impact it's had on him, and how he's dealing with anxiety and all of these issues that are a direct result of the fact for him going over there fighting what was essentially a useless war that accomplished absolutely nothing. And I think when we talk about cost, it's easy to look at these big monetary numbers, and that's disturbing in and of itself. But if you ever take some time to sit and talk with some of these men and women who have actually had to deal with that, the human cost, the societal cost, the cost to our liberty that goes along with these unconstitutional wars, it's not even something that we can measure.
Yeah, and I think that was actually pretty much exemplified when Ron Paul was running for president. Certainly, he got a very small percentage of the overall vote, but he got the largest amount of donations from active duty military people. Yeah. Everyone from Eisenhower to I think it was MacArthur, George Washington, the people who were involved in war tend to be the ones that recognize the costs, as you're talking about, not just the economic cost, but the human cost and the pain to go through it. I don't know. I've never experienced that. And I've had people tell me, some chicken hawks that have never done it, that, oh, you can't be against it. You can't be against the war if you haven't ever been in it. Like, oh, no, I just pay attention to the ones who have been. But that's a whole side story. So our approach has always been that if you rely on Washington, D.C. to limit itself, it's always getting bigger. We know that with $1.3 trillion in spending from the so-called conservative GOP, which is just insane. If this had happened under Obama, they'd be going nuts. But of course, they just give it to us now. So today we want to talk about some positive things that are happening. This is kind of the dry season for the 10th Amendment and nullification movement. Most state legislatures are in session from January through about May or April. And during the summer, there isn't as many things that are happening that we report on the newsworthy end on a day-to-day basis. But there are a few things that came up over the last few weeks and some more recently that I thought were really interesting to talk about. And the first one is down in Iowa, or up in Iowa, I guess, depending where you're coming from. That, well, actually, the Iowa, you did an article on this, right?
I did
and then a podcast, too.
Yeah, this whole thing just completely fascinated me.
So the title here is Iowa High Court Nullifies Horrible Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court Fourth Amendment Precedent. That sounds pretty amazing to me. What's going on?
Yeah, it was really amazing. And it's funny because some people read that title and said, oh, a state court can't nullify the Supreme Court. Well, absolutely it did. There are certain circumstances that came together to make this possible. But whenever the Supreme Court issues an opinion, that pretty much becomes the standard for the entire United States. And
precedent rise, right? So like everybody just applies it.
Exactly.
Every court just applies the Supreme Court's opinion, not ruling, not law, but their opinion in every case that touches along it. Well, the Supreme Court said such and such, so here's how we're going to apply it. So they've just become, they're not even independent. They have no thought process of their own. They're just reading Supreme Court opinions and putting them into practice on current events.
Yeah, exactly. So, perfect example, a couple of years ago, there was a horrible decision in Maryland where the Supreme Court basically decided that the police department can take your DNA if they arrest you. And the problem is that this was a state issue. It was state police. It was a state trial. It should have been a state. The whole thing should have been handled in Maryland. And unfortunately, like everything, they decided they were going to make a federal case out of it. And unsurprisingly, the Supreme Court opinion was, let the government do this thing. And so even as it was reported, it was like, this is now the standard in the entire United States. Well, in Iowa, the Iowa Supreme Court decided, you know what, we're not going to apply this lower standard. And the issue was a search and seizure case. And in a nutshell, the Supreme Court has held that if your car is being impounded, then the police can do an impound search and they don't have to have a warrant. So if they, in this guy's case, he had a burnout taillight. They pulled him over for that. Turns out his registration was expired, so they decided to impound his car. And then they searched his car on the impound search and found a crack pipe or a meth pipe or whatever, some type of drug paraphernalia, and charged him with a drug crime. And his position is that this is an unconstitutional search. There was no warrant. There was no specificity. They just basically rummaged through his car. And under the Supreme Court standard, that's allowed. But the Iowa High Court said, you know what? This is not the standard that we want to apply in Iowa. And they used the state constitution, which has a provision that's very similar to the Fourth Amendment in it. And they said that this provision in our state constitution applies to these inventory searches. If they're going to do it, they got to have a warrant. We don't care what the Supreme Court said. And they actually said that the Supreme Court has set the bar too low, that we're not going to go along with this precedent. So, yeah, it's amazing.
It's incredible. I don't know if that made a lot of local press there. It should. The interesting thing, in my view, is that if it does make a lot of local press, what a lot of people do is their process on a lawsuit is they go through the state courts, and then when the state court doesn't agree with them, they take it to the federal court. And as you said, a lot of time the federal court will then create a precedent that applies to everyone in the whole country, and the Supreme Court continues to rubber stamp more federal power, oftentimes. Not always, but oftentimes. Right. Now, when they get it right, it's better for everyone. But I don't know if I want anything good to be like on the tipping scales of whether or not, well, like one judge in Washington, D.C. decides to change his or her mind.
Right.
So that is a very precarious situation. And even when they do something what we would think is good, I think it is dangerous in the long run for liberty, because if you rely on that, you're basically subjugating an entire population to an opinion of one person.
Exactly.
That's totally opposite of the views of liberty that anyone should have. You can't, being in support of liberty is not supporting a libertarian dictator. This is just nonsense. So this is actually fantastic. If people learn about this in Iowa, maybe they won't use this same process, and instead they'll only want to go through the state courts because the state court is being better than the federal courts.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not a very common thing, but maybe this will encourage other state courts to do the same.
And I think that the truth of the matter is, I don't even think they don't even go to the state court level anymore. I mean, they automatically
go right to federal,
right to the federal court.
Yeah.
And, this was not the structure that the founding generation intended at all. They intended a decentralized system. They intended for that state Bill of Rights to apply to the state courts and to the state government. They didn't plan on the federal government being the liberty enforcement squad. And I've said this over and over again, when you let the federal government define liberty and define your rights, then you're giving them the power to literally do that, to define your rights. When you want them to enforce it, they get to define it, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and they always end up over time. They always end up defining it less and less. And people talk about that we're getting into incorporation doctrine territory.
Right.
We should link to Dave Benner's book at members.10thamendmentcenter.com. Let me see if I can put this up in our notes real quick here so you have it handy. But so this is the idea of having the Bill of Rights apply to the states and having the federal government enforce that on the states. Now, whatever you may think about this, pro or con, I would say one only needs to look at the history of the federal government and recognize that it is not trustworthy. These people are not good for protecting your liberty. Anyone who is willing to spend $1.3 trillion is not someone to be counted on to protect liberty, to limit government. So maybe sometimes it works out in ways that people like, but it is not a reliable institution. And I think the right to keep and bear arms is a great example. When incorporation really started happening in the 1920s, there weren't restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms in Washington, D.C. But over the years, as Washington, D.C. gets to define that individual right to keep and bear arms, and they use the term individual, even though, as we know from Suzanne Sherman's report that we had here a few days ago, that even Scalia, when he talks about an individual right that can't be infringed, later on in his same opinion in Heller, he says, but, it's not unlimited. He's basically saying, well, we can restrict it. So that's what happens when you get a centralized power structure involved. And you just have to look at the history of federal gun control to see how they're going to treat your rights on various issues. Over time, it's just going to get whittled away.
And I want to emphasize that it's not that we have any great faith in the state court.
No, they suck too.
Being any better, but there's 50 of them.
Yes.
And it's the whole principle of decentralization. It's the whole principle that you want to disperse power as broadly as possible.
Yeah, you can compete. It's like a market. I know it's not a free market, but the more competition is, the greater chance you have of actually having something that a positive outcome. And the less likely that a negative outcome is going to sweep the entire country.
Exactly. And I can vote with my feet. I can live in a place where I know that liberty is going to be better protected than in another place.
Today I would say, I was actually thinking that we see these Cato reports and things talking about who's got the freest state. And I was thinking of doing a 10th Amendment Center report on this. It would be one page. One page for all 50 states, all of them rated 50.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not even kidding, because really the variations are just small. Oh, yeah, there's no property tax here, but it's illegal to grow various plants in your backyard, or you can't have milk from a cow, or you can't have a gun here. Like, it just, certain things are, like, some people look at certain things as being more free while ignoring things that aren't important to them. So every state is really pretty awful in comparison to how things should be. So if we're going to grade, if we're going to grade on a bell curve, then that's different. But if we're going to grade on just actually advancing liberty, they're all pretty bad. But the idea of having states, as you're talking about, Mike, is to disperse this power. So when one makes a bad choice, people learn how that bad choice affects people pretty quickly.
Right.
When you have a one-size-fits-all solution, it's hard to determine who's the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the old de Tocqueville laboratory of ideas. You called it the 50 laboratories of democracy.
Yeah.
And basically, in the United States today, we have one laboratory creating Frankenstein.
Oh, nice. Well, not nice, but nice quote. So tell me more a little bit about the Iowa thing.
So I think I was done.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know that there's, that's, the bottom line is that folks in Iowa now have a higher standard of search and seizure protection under the state constitution than I do here in Kentucky, because in Kentucky, the police are going to go with what the Supreme Court has said.
So I pulled up the report here. Here's the quote that you included in this report from the Iowa Supreme Court. It says, quote, "We have repeatedly declined to follow the approach of the United States Supreme Court in its interpretation of what commentator has referred to as an ever-shrinking Fourth Amendment." I honestly never thought I'd see in modern times, and this is one of my arguments against going to courts, is that they all just fall in line. Right. So this is a shimmer of hope.
And I think it's important to note that part of the reason that this is possible is that we have state constitutions and we have state bills of rights. And I don't think a lot of people realize this. I bet if you asked 25 people whether your state constitution has a bill of rights, I bet 23 of them wouldn't know.
Well, most people don't even know what's in the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution.
But I think a lot of educated people don't realize that state constitutions have state bills of rights, and a lot of them are quite a bit more encompassing and better worded and broader.
I know the Illinois one is bad on the right to keep and bear arms. Right, it's got a lot of loopholes.
Right, there's some.
But so then gun rights advocates in Illinois are always want to get the federal government to protect them from the state they are choosing to live in, instead of actually trying to get a state constitutional amendment. Maybe the process is almost impossible in Illinois, but certainly getting the federal government to protect your right to keep and bear arms is an impossible thing. We know it doesn't happen. You can elect an NRA-backed president, and the ATF keeps doing what it's doing.
Right.
So it doesn't work. There has been no federal gun laws repealed, and Jeff Sessions just last week talked about really strictly enforcing the unconstitutional, Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, which was passed by Republicans.
Yeah. And, I'll say this. You look at a state like California, and California gets badmouthed all the time.
Which I do look at all the time. I'm right here.
Yeah, you do. You look right out your window. And, you guys have some fantastic privacy protections that are in the state constitution.
Yes. So, and asset forfeiture is in state law. And, of course, legalization on marijuana is a personal freedom. Certainly the ability to walk down the street 2 blocks and pick up a jug of raw milk without having to own part of a cow is a freedom of choice to eat something. Whether that's a good choice or not, I drink raw kefir. It's interestingly enough, I have a pretty bad dairy allergy, except if I eat it raw.
Huh.
So I've been told by people that it's the pasteurization process.
Yeah.
Which prevents.
Well,
yeah, I don't know. I don't understand it, but for whatever reason, I'm fine. I do not have that, unhappy effect when I have dairy. So this is very positive news in Iowa. I think it's a pretty big deal. It's probably more for people who really geek out on this type of stuff, like you and I do. But I think it's an important kind of beachhead for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look sometimes at a new way to. If you're going to rely on a court strategy, see if you can find a court strategy that will lead to this type of result instead of always looking to Washington, D.C. and hoping that Brett Kavanaugh is an originalist.
Right.
So moving forward, talking about personal freedoms, let's talk about growing industrial hemp. In Illinois, just signed into law on Sunday, was SB 2298. Is that right? SB 2298. This is kind of it's a positive step for legalizing industrial hemp farming, not the THC-based marijuana cannabis, but something that's used in raw materials, food, clothing, rope, paper, oils, etc., etc. Like I feed my birds hemp oil. It's high in omegas. It's healthy for them. A lot of pet owners use things that have omegas, and it's good for their nutrition. So this is a food product, and it's grown from hemp. But the hemp seeds on the bag are imported from Manitoba, Canada.
Yep.
When it could easily be grown, they call it weed for a reason, because it's easy to grow all over the place. And at a time where a lot of, especially farming in the U.S., has been on a huge decline, except where it's getting subsidies from Washington, D.C., which is disgusting, people could be more self-reliant if they're growing hemp and processing and selling seeds and making oil, etc. So legalizing hemp on a state-by-state basis, even though the feds say you can't do it, is a very positive thing. Now, we got kind of a potentially really good one in Illinois, right?
Yeah, I think it's better, and it's going to be better in practice than it looks on paper.
Okay.
Because I think it's pretty clear, looking at the language of the new law, that they do plan to create a federally compliant, research-only hemp program. And if you're watching me, you notice I'm doing the air quotes. Because it's virtually impossible for any kind of real hemp program to be federally compliant. And I'm learning this more and more as I'm getting deeper and deeper into this issue, especially looking at it here in my home state of Kentucky. I just recently started taking CBD oil. I've got some issues with arthritis, and it's been recommended to me to deal with pain and inflammation. Seems to be helping so far. But, I walked right into a shop, talked to a very knowledgeable clerk, walked out the door with a bottle of CBD oil. The federal government says that that's illegal. The DEA says that both me and the shop owner could potentially go to jail for having this product. Nobody's enforcing it. And this is Kentucky, a hemp compliant state. So I think,
federally compliant with federal law, supposedly, where we're compliant but not. And I think it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The DEA has actually said their guidance on this is basically states need to recognize that if they're legalizing CBD, so this is oil not from the seeds, it's oil from the flower, from the resin that creates this cannabinoid that people use for anti-inflammatory reasons and many others. This is illegal. We're not really enforcing it, or we're not, but you have to recognize that you're violating federal law, and at any point we could decide to enforce it, or so they say.
Right. But I was talking to a guy the other day. As it turns out, I play hockey with a guy who actually operates one of the largest CBD manufacturing companies in the United States, right here in Kentucky, where under our federally compliant program, which is ironic. But I was talking to him about it, and I asked him kind of tongue-in-cheek. I said, so, you worried about federal enforcement? He just laughed. I mean, he literally laughed. He said, there's no way that at this point that they have not only the resources, but the political will. I mean, can you imagine the hue and cry? There's so many people that are using this product. Mothers are using it for their kids to control seizures. It's just, you're never going to put that genie back into the bottle. So I think even though the
way they'd have to shut it down in L.A. is they'd have to go to grocery store chains.
Right.
Armed to the teeth.
Yeah.
Like we know the FDA did this to wow, I can't even remember the name of the business. Here in LA, they were selling raw milk, Rawsome. And the FDA raided Rawsome Foods back in like 2011, fully armed, shutting down raw illegal cheese, we have no problem getting that now. I don't really understand the basis for that raid. Maybe the feds didn't like it, but yeah, they were stopping cheese. And they came in armed to the teeth. Can you imagine going into like 50 grocery stores, plus the little independent coffee shop down the street, plus the little market around the corner? I mean, the stuff is available everywhere here in foods, at a juice shop, all around. They just, logistically, they couldn't. Plus the PR nightmare, especially in a... Man, can you imagine if Jeff Sessions did this? The guy's already hated.
Right.
I mean, he's hated by most everybody except idiots. And like, this is no way they're going to be able to pull that off. So it's not happening. We know it's not happening. The DEA has even admitted they can't enforce this, or they're not going to, probably because they can't. And they just still issue these warnings that sound tough. It's basically the schoolyard bully. If you don't do this, I'm going to punch you in the face, and then they just never do it. You just have to stand up to the bully. And when enough people stand up to the bully has to back down. They're just threatening it to try to scare people out of being more free.
Yeah. And so basically the situation that you have now is that even in these states that are federally compliant, it's like you said, it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They set up these programs and they do the licenses and they create these research programs and whatnot. And basically it's just all a big front to create a commercial hemp program.
Yeah.
Here in our research-only Kentucky, we have the same situation. I can walk right into my Kroger. There's a giant display of chocolate that is infused with hemp. Again, the DEA says it's illegal.
Yeah, the DEA basically takes the position, right, that you can research it, you can study it. I don't know if they say you're supposed to destroy it after that. Maybe you can make some products, but
their position is that it's not for anything that this is the way one DEA person put it in an interview. He said, if it is in anything that can be consumed, we consider it to be illegal under federal law.
Yeah, so California, the California Food Department, whatever it is, they basically issued a statement last month that says they integrate FDA rules on CBD. And therefore, CBD is 100% illegal in every situation in food. But yet, it's available everywhere. So you have the state and the federal government both getting nullified by individuals and businesses, which is even more awesome. And I think that is a lesson that can be applied to everything, and it should be eventually. Well, we can get into that another time. But so the Illinois law basically says we're creating a federally compliant research program. They go out of their way to say that they're going to create a research program. But then, as you noted, they say there's also a section in there that says, quote, the research purpose requirement shall not be construed to limit the commercial sale of industrial hemp. So they're going to set up a research program, but they're not going to do anything to stop commercial sales of industrial hemp products. And therefore, they're kicking the can, or they're kicking the ball over to Washington, D.C. They're punting and saying, well, we're going to follow your rules on this, but we're not going to help you enforce if anybody violates that. And that is a really interesting strategy. I don't know if they're intending to do it. Someone actually included that language in there on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very in-your-face phrasing. I mean,
I like it.
It's not ambiguous.
I like it. It passed 106-3 in the House and 50-0. Governor Bruce Rauner signed it on almost the last chance he could have gotten. Yeah. I mean, he ran the clock on that one. I don't think he necessarily wanted to, but that's very positive. So in Illinois, that is now in effect. So I think over time we'll see some positive things.
I was thinking as I was writing the report, it's interesting because 2 years ago, I would have been pretty negative about this bill.
Same here. I was on CBD. I was as well. I'm like, there's a bunch of states. I remember a Georgia CBD bill, and I didn't really understand the depth of DEA prohibition on this. Oh, they're doing 0 THC because they want to comply with the feds, not realizing that everybody's been violating federal law all along on this too. And the feds are insane to be making this innocuous product illegal.
Absolutely. Not only innocuous, helpful.
Yes.
I mean.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you called me out on that because that's totally incorrect.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think this is amazing. And then we've got a couple other bills I think we're going to cover in Colorado that just shows that once these programs get put in place, they tend to expand as the demand for these products expand and the market expands.
My understanding is that there's these two new laws, SB 205 and HB 1295. Did one of them actually make it possible for the state to recognize that hemp can go into food?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we're dealing with here, and that basically ties it. I think that's the big one we should really be covering, is that when you have the state and the federal government against the market and the people, it's a little bit, it can be more difficult. The thing is, the California market, when it comes to things like this, illegal stuff, because the cities are so massive here, When stuff gets out of hand, it gets out of hand really fast and government can't stop it. For example, they have been trying to shut down hot dog carts for years. They're almost exclusively run by poor people sitting at a cart, grilling a hot dog with some bacon on it. They sit outside of bars and nightclubs. There are thousands of them that run around the city. They literally tried to shut them down. They were going to have an enforcement agency that shut down all these illegal hot dog carts because people might die because someone selling a hot dog really wants to poison a customer so they never make any money to pay for their kids and family back home. I mean, the mentality of this is nonsense. So they tried to shut it down, but the community was pissed. They're not licensed today, years later, and they're not shut down. So it gets out of hand really fast, and then the state or the city can only issue warnings and threaten people, and it's, again, a PR nightmare. But if you get the state out of the way, it's even easier. So Colorado, HB 1295 is going to treat hemp like food ingredients. They're not going to integrate the FDA view on this, and that's going to make the market expand even faster in Colorado. Colorado's a step ahead of us here in California.
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, what it did is
side note, I'm sorry to interrupt. So
no, go ahead.
All this talk about California being part of the resistance, it's funny when you get down to it, California wants to be federally compliant on the government level.
Right.
So there are a lot of resistance type that won't, like, screw DC in California right now. But that wouldn't happen if Barack Obama was still in office. But the government level, the bureaucrats, absolutely want to be just like Washington.
Well, it's one big happy family.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of money flowing back and forth.
Oh yeah.
That's the real the fruit of the system is the dollars that flow between all of these agencies.
So Colorado though.
So in essence, what they've done is prior to the passage of this law, any type of food product that had hemp in it was considered adulterated. And that's just a fancy legal term for, it has some type of drug, something in it that's illegal.
Yeah, that's the federal view.
Yeah. So from now on, as far as state law in Colorado goes, if you have chocolate with hemp in it or, a cup of coffee with CBD oil, then those products will not be considered adulterated. They'll be just like any other, just like putting Splenda or, cane sugar in your cup of coffee.
Splenda is more adulterated than
right.
hemp seeds or hemp oil or
Absolutely.
CBD. So, and some people would call it toxic in some ways, where hemp is not.
Right.
So Colorado is an interesting case on hemp because they have the most acreage of hemp growing anywhere in the country. They aren't even attempting to be federally compliant as far as research only. And in fact, we've done a report that noted that even before the state legalized it, people were already growing hemp.
Yep.
So really, this is, I think, the greatest example of how this all works. When people start the process and people start living more freely without getting permission, and enough people do it, or enough people profit off of it, create a market, then eventually the government, local government wants to, or the state government wants to pretend that they're on everybody's side to look good. And then that opens the door even further. And then it gets to a point where no one's getting in the way. And now Colorado having gone through that process, now the state government is trying to make it even easier because it's popular.
Yeah, absolutely. And
that's the beauty of spineless politicians.
Gun people should take note.
Yeah. Well, we're not getting into that one today. One quick other one that we're not going to cover this one in too much detail, but we did a great report just earlier this morning, a full front page article from J.P. Cortez called Fake Money, Sound Money, and Government Malfeasance. He's talking about the history of money. And in essence, the story is fiat money is fake money. So that's why it's essential to use sound money. Now, some people think crypto is sound money. Other people think gold and silver is sound money. I lean towards that, although I actually like crypto because I just like having an option to not use federal government money. Let's just call it government money. I don't want to use government money. Again, step by step, Arizona 2 years ago passed a first step to help advance the use of sound money. gold and silver in day-to-day transactions. Small first step. Now a small second step just passed and went into effect just this month. Well, it passed earlier in the year, but it went into effect earlier this month. This was from Representative Mark Fincham, who's doing a great job on this. What was the bill number? 2014? 2013.
Yep, 2013.
Give us the overview.
Interesting bill, and gets into the weeds a little bit into finances.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. But in effect, if you run a trust company, so a trust company is a company that handles money, it acts as a fiduciary. So if you invest money for a company to invest on your behalf, that would be a trust company. You're putting something into it in trust. Under state law, a trust company has to maintain a certain level of assets to match what it's being entrusted with. So it's kind of like a bond or a surety. So they're holding these assets, and that way it shows that the trust company is financially stable. What this bill did in a nutshell is it now allows gold and silver, other precious metals, to be used as part of this underlying asset. So not only can you use Federal Reserve notes, but they can actually have gold and silver as part of their asset collection to underlie their trust. I don't know if that really completely made sense.
Well, no, that's a huge deal. So I follow the crypto space personally, just in my own personal time.
Right.
And a lot of people talk about how they want institutional money. That's going to make it go mainstream. And I think that is, I mean, when you have the big money people involved in an investment product or a currency or whatever, then that drives its use. So
right.
If the institutionalized people in Arizona, these giant trust companies in the past couldn't use gold and silver, and now they can, that is a small behind-the-scenes positive thing. If they can offer products, I mean, this is for rich people. But if rich people are exposed to something that protects their wealth, then that's a very positive thing. I want everyone. I mean, I'm not anti-rich people.
No.
But like if they can do it, that's great. This is very positive for them. And of course, to have the institutional, the big money investment companies having allowed to do this in Arizona, that's positive. That's another piece of the puzzle. And it seems like Mark Fincham is looking at this as a step-by-step. He's going to find every angle possible. First, he takes capital gains taxes away from, so when you and I were to use gold and silver, if we wanted to make a purchase at a grocery store for like $50, we'd get taxed like $10 on that to exchange
right.
it for government money and make that purchase. So you remove that in Arizona, it makes it more likely. He did that. That was the first bill. Now, the second one is towards the institutional side. I'm not sure what he's going to do next year, but we're definitely going to be watching. Hopefully it keeps the process going.
Well, for sure. I've done some email communication with him, and he's flat out said that this is a step-by-step process that he has in mind, and he's looking at different ways, and I'll be interested to see what he does next year too. Here's another way that might help people to understand what's going on in the crypto space that is a little bit more clear. We did a report on this actually that a couple of years ago, Coinbase pulled out of the state of Wyoming.
Coinbase is the giant cryptocurrency exchange.
So yeah, you imagine it's where you can take your fiat money and turn it into crypto and vice versa. You can buy and sell crypto on Coinbase. They pulled completely out of Wyoming because under Wyoming state law, they were being required to hold a double reserve. So in other words, if you had $100 of crypto and you lived in Wyoming and it was in Coinbase, they had to have another $100 in cash to back up that $100.
They only require the banks to have $10 out of the 100.
Right.
So if that isn't a skewed system, I don't know what is.
Yeah, there was no, oh gosh, I can't think of the word.
Fractional reserve banking.
Yeah, there was no fractional reserve for
crypto. It was a double fraction. Right.
But in a number of laws that were passed in Wyoming to try to facilitate the use of cryptocurrency, that was one of the things they took away. They took away that double requirement, and lo and behold, Coinbase came back.
Yeah.
So, again, when you remove these barriers, you allow the market space to operate the market's going to operate when that happens. So,
and we also covered the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, which removed all kinds of restrictions and impediments, taxation on gold and silver exchange as well. So it looks like they're basically saying, oh, we want people to have an alternative to the government currency, to be able to use it, buy, sell, exchange, and that's very positive. Wyoming is creating kind of an island of freedom on that. I'd like to see them continue going forward. Now, it really is, and I think the end result, and this is how we can wrap it up today, the end result, and I think the message is the same, is it really is up to the people. It is up to individuals to make choices to do things differently. Because it doesn't matter how many laws are passed or how many laws are repealed or how many things are gotten out of the way. The end result is that it is up to the people. When enough people make a decision that's different than the status quo changes.
Yep. And, it's, I don't know, this might sound weird, but it feels good to exercise your freedom. When you have those opportunities, and I say this because, like I said, I started using the CBD oil.
Yeah.
And it felt good for me to be able to go into this store and
know that you're breaking a federal law.
Right. There's a little naughtiness in that. And to know that I was able to act on what I think is good advice from people I trust.
Yes.
And to know that I have the opportunity to do this, even though that there's these overlords that think I shouldn't be able to do this.
Yeah.
Well, F them. I'm doing it because I feel like this is what is best for me. And we need more people to have, because there's so many people to be like, well, I don't know if I should do that because the government doesn't say that this is the way to, well, the government doesn't.
Well, people come along when others start taking action. So that's great. We love the smell of freedom in the morning.
And think about for a second, and I'll close with this. Just think about this for a second. Who you're putting your trust in.
Yeah.
When you're trusting government. You're trusting Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell and Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and all of these people to make decisions for you. I mean,
let's say you trust Donald Trump. Then you're also trusting Elizabeth Warren. Well, because if you trust Donald Trump to do something, then you're trusting that the next person is going to be the same person.
Exactly.
Or vice versa. So the people who trusted Obama are clearly recognizing that they shouldn't have trusted, well, not all of them. There are some. And there are some who are saying, whoa, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't have trusted Obama with this because we couldn't figure out how to get another Obama in. Hopefully that carries into more people. I have had personal conversations with leftists that have told me this, that they recognize this. Whether they'll hold to that in the future is another story, but I think learning it's a real strong lesson when the political teams change so drastically.
Here's the thing. You don't want these people running your life?
Nope.
You don't want most of them running a vacuum cleaner.
All right, with that, we got to run. Thank you so much for watching. We're very grateful for you spending this time with us. Make sure to go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/support. $2 a month helps us in our efforts. We are gearing up for the 2019 nullification season. We'll have a lot of interesting things coming up in the near future. Again, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.